Hey everyone, good morning. Charlie here. Hope you're all doing well. Before we get started, please let me apologize for my voice. I have something of a cold / I'm recovering from too much karaoke and drinking over the weekend. Apologies. This video is based on a comment I received from one Cassandra Evangelista a couple weeks ago, I guess now. And she was asking how important it is to be a competent Japanese speaker while working as an English teacher here in Japan. Now, as always, I want to point out before approaching the subject that this is only based on my experiences that I've had as an Eikaiwa teacher in Japan. I've never worked as a JET, as an ALT, only as an Eikaiwa teacher. So keep that in mind going forward. Basically, Japanese is unimportant for you being able to do the job that you're hired to do. But we'll elaborate on that as we go through the video. Now, what I mean by that is you do not need a single word of Japanese to do the two most important things for your job, for your success, and for your immediate value to the employer that is paying you, letting you come to Japan, and giving you your visa, right? The first of those things, of course, is your ability to teach. If you can't teach, it doesn't matter whether you're a native English speaker, whether you're fluent in Japanese, whatever the case may be, right? You're not going to be a good fit. Your numbers are going to go down, your company's going to be unhappy, and see you later, right? And the second most important thing, right, which your ability in Japanese cannot and will not affect, is your ability to plan fun, interesting lessons that will keep your students wanting to come back and, will keep them going home to their parents and saying, oh, hey, I had such a great lesson today, it was fun, and this is what I said, this is what I know now, know how to say, right? And both of those things put together are what will make you a successful English teacher in Japan. Now, that said, Japanese, I think, actually, even just a small level of Japanese is the key to you being a happy employee here, a happy worker here, for a number of reasons. Now, I should point out that I think Japanese is absolutely essential in your personal life outside of your school, to living a vibrant, interesting, dynamic, fulfilling kind of life here. But that's a topic for another video. But I know some of you will say, oh, you have to learn Japanese, right? Yes, I agree you should. But going into the workplace, right? As I've said, the two most essential things are not affected by your Japanese speaking ability. However, there are things that start to happen when your employer recognizes that you do speak at least a little bit of Japanese, right? Now, what I have found, especially recently, now that I've started to demonstrate my proficiency more and more often, is that knowing Japanese is absolutely essential to you having a growing, sort of evolving role in your company. If I had the same sort of involvement that I had when I first came on board, I think I would probably be miserable because I would just be this tape player stuck on repeat that I'd be doing basically the same thing day in and day out with some minor variations in games and languages and things like that. But recently, if you follow me on Twitter, I talked about how I needed to write an invitation to an event we have coming up this weekend, and I needed to write it not only in English, but then I needed to translate it into Japanese. Not just Japanese keigo, right? Polite business sort of Japanese, and that was a really difficult, interesting challenge for me, and it went okay. But the reason I was able to do that, of course, is because they knew I could speak Japanese, right? And so there's a couple things to consider there, right? My value goes up as an employee, and that makes my job just the slightest bit more secure, I like to think. And two, it means that I get to have a more interesting, more fulfilling job, right? So that's something to consider. Now, the second thing is something I've been thinking about a lot recently, and that is my independence, right? While I'm at the company, while I'm in my school, I am their teacher, 150%. When I'm outside of the school, and this is something I talked about before, I'm still a teacher, right? I'm still a teacher, but my decisions are my own, 100% my own, right? My ability to pay my bills, my ability to go to the doctor, my ability to do all these really kind of essential, important things I can do by myself now, because I have this level of Japanese, mediocre though it may be. And that might not sound like that big of a deal, but I want you to consider when I first came here, I got really sick, and my boss had to go with me to the hospital, right, as some guy like fondled around down on my underbits to make sure that everything was okay when I was really quite sick. And my manager had to be in the room with me to translate. As you might imagine, it's super, super embarrassing. Not really an experience I want any of you to have to repeat, not something I want to repeat. So yeah, that's one thing I mean by independence. But the other thing is that there is a lot of decision making that will go on your behalf, simply because people, they're not doing it to sort of take away any sort of agency, but because they're not sure you can handle making that decision and making that decision properly and effectively by yourself, right? Now, the biggest example that springs to mind is when the lease was renewed for this apartment last summer. I actually wanted to move out, and I planned to move out this summer, but I was never consulted in that decision because it was such a headache, right? To get me into the meeting with a realtor, to go through all that sort of more complex language that I would have no idea how to navigate. And now we've already started that discussion about what it's going to be like here in a couple months when it's time to move out, right? That decision is now mine. And that's sort of something that I see more and more across the board, but I want to keep this video somewhat short, so I don't want to get into it too much. Now, as we've already talked about, your biggest role, right, is your ability to make great lessons for your students and your ability to teach your students. That, whatever. Duh. But there comes a time when, maybe it comes pretty fast, when you need to be able to communicate on some level with your students beyond body language, beyond gestures, beyond a little bit of English that maybe you've taught them, or even if they're a little bit higher level, right? And it also deals with being able to understand their needs. Now, this can be something as simple as with your little kids, right? When they're telling you, hey, listen, I really have to take a piss. Like, I've got to go, or it's going to be all over the floor, right? That obviously is very important for you to be able to understand, because otherwise you've got a pissy little kid running around your classroom, right? Or something a little more stinky, as may be the case, right? So it's little things like that, but it's other things, and that you can understand maybe why a kid is acting the way they're acting, or maybe why they're not doing something as quickly as they should be. An example of this is last week, one of my kids was just out of control. He wouldn't get out his book. He wasn't doing anything. And I was trying to get through the class for these other students, and then I took a second to listen to him, and he just kept saying, "It's stuck in my bag. It's stuck in my bag." And then in this very sort of sad, very sort of dejected voice, he said, "Why don't you understand me?" And of course, this crushed me, right? Because I was sort of ignoring his needs a little bit in favor of expedition. And yeah, but that's not something I would have been able to understand at all. I would have stayed in that phase of like, okay, hurry up, like come on, let's go, had I not been able to understand what he was saying in Japanese. So that's something to consider. Being able to understand their needs, being able to understand their problems, being able to understand when they're about to explode in a shitstorm. The last thing I want to point out, and this is something I've sort of started encountering a little more frequently, is that knowing Japanese helps me avoid misunderstandings with the Japanese staff. Now, generally speaking, at least in my experience, Eikaiwa schools put a manager into those schools who has anywhere from like an upper intermediate to an advanced to a native level of English ability, so that you don't have misunderstandings, so that you can come to them with any problems you have, both outside of the school and in the school, and get them dealt with sort of quickly, right? However, sometimes you end up working with people who their English ability is a little bit lower, and so you will say something to them in English, the meaning is completely misconstrued, and then you wind up in a very bad situation. It has become clear to me that in those situations when you want to make sure things are absolutely clear, sometimes it's better to make it both clear in English and in Japanese, right? That way there's no misunderstanding. You don't end up in crappy situations. Your manager doesn't end up in a crappy situation. Your school doesn't end up in a crappy situation, right? So, yeah, I guess that's really all I have to say about this topic, guys. To recap, it is not important at the most basic level, particularly when you're just starting out here and you're trying to find your feet in that first year as an English teacher, to understand Japanese. However, as I pointed out, there are many, many reasons, I think 4 or 5 reasons I pointed out, why at least eventually coming into some competency with the Japanese language will help you have a more interesting, more fulfilling, kind of a safer and a more independent personal and professional life while working here. So, yeah, guess that's all I have to say about that. Thanks to Cassandra Evangelista for the question. It's a really good question, something I've actually been thinking about talking about for a little while, so thank you very much. Let me know what you guys think about this down in the comments below. Have you found that it's important in your experience to speak the language of whatever country you're teaching in, or whatever country you've taught in, to be an effective teacher and to have a happy life there? Yeah, let me know down in the comments below. Thanks always for watching. Please share and like this video if you did in fact like this video, and we'll see y'all very soon indeed. Thanks, guys. Cheers.